Hi, Kyle. Welcome to the 100X show.
Hey, Maddie. Great to be on. Thank you for having me here.
So, Kyle, just to kick things off, can you tell our audience very briefly about yourself and Multicoin?
Sure. I founded Multichain Capital in 2017. Tushar and I made the decision to launch Multicoin in May of that year. We ended up launching our hedge fund on October 1st of 2017. Since then, we've also added a series of venture funds, and we're currently deploying out of our third venture fund. Today, the firm manages billions in assets across those vehicles. We have 16 employees, I believe. Most of us are in the US. We also have one in China. Her name is Mabel. She's a partner on the investment team. We invest today at all stages. Check sizes can go from 1 million to 500 million and everything in between. We are comfortable investing in weird tech things, infrastructure, middleware, consumer apps, everything in between, you name it, we're comfortable investing in. Our only real mandate is that it needs to be kind of crypto native. We've been running the fund for about 4.5 years now, or I should say the various funds for 4.5 years now, and are absolutely loving it. And we're always looking to back the next amazing entrepreneurs working on cool new things.
Awesome, Kyle. So, when I think about Multicoin, the first thing that pops in my head is Solana. And I've been reading your blogs and your thesis for the last couple of years around Solana. So for me, the three most important tenets for your thesis around Solana is that it's a bet on a non-EVM chain, so native ecosystem, and consequently more loyal developers, less fragmentation of liquidity, and a higher likelihood of a killer app. Also, it's a layer one without sharding, so better composability, stronger composability, and it can also finally it can also scale over time as GPU performance and cost decrease and performance improve. So apart from these factors, do you see any other optionality with Solana? And do you think all of these factors are kind of priced in by the investors in the market at the moment?
So those are all good elements of Solana that I think are meaningfully differentiated and certainly help contribute to why we like it. But actually, I think the most important part of Solana is really the focus on single shard scaling. And then there's a lot of secondary and tertiary implications of that. And actually, those are, I think, the most important thing. As a general rule, whenever you're evaluating some new thing, whether it's an investment, whether it's where you want to live, doesn't really matter what kind of car you want to drive. Most people tend to either do this formally or maybe they do it informally. But they say, oh, there's these 5 variables, and try and do some ranking system among the priority of those 5 variables. I've kind of discovered that that's the wrong way to think about decision making broadly. I've discovered that in almost everything in my life, there's one variable that matters more than all of the others. And the key is figuring out what that variable is and then optimizing around it. When you think about scaling a blockchain, it's actually not obvious what the right variable is. The simple variable that people think about as transactions per second is just kind of the very crude way to think about, what should you optimize for? But that's not quite right, because obviously transactions in these systems are based on state, and that state has some value or some meaning. The more you break things up into different shards, different rollups, different whatevers, the harder it is for those states to imbue value on other parts of the state. So the simplest form of state transfer obviously is just a payment, right? I send 5 coins from me to you. And if you receive the coins in 1 second or you receive the coins in 1 minute, probably doesn't matter very much. But as you get into more and more financial centric transactions, as you get more and more parties involved in a transaction where a transaction is no longer between 2 people, but is, let's say, between 500 people or 5,000 people. And so as that happens, there's more and more need for the various pieces of state to be able to interact with each other according to some predefined rules, aka smart contracts. And so when I think about smart contracts and scaling them, I don't just think strictly about where can we just get sheer volume of transactions, but it's those transactions need to be able to interface with each other and with existing state and do intelligent things based on that. When you break things up into dozens of rollups or shards, you just make all of that more complicated. You increase total latency. You break atomicity of transactions. A lot of other things get broken. And obviously things like managing leverage becomes harder because latency increases. As latency increases, that means you have to make systems quite frankly, less aggressive or more conservative rather, which is not good for a lot of people. And so, we've really thought about all of these things. And I'll get to the last part of this rant I'll say is social coordination cost is a big part of this. Part of the reason Ethereum layer 1 works so well is because everyone is reading and writing from the same piece of state. That means the wallets, that means the Infura and Graph and Alchemy and all those things. That means obviously the updates to the state. That means where Coinbase and Binance and FTX and all of these exchanges are enabling deposits and withdrawals. As you fragment the state into more and more smaller things, everyone is entering this state from a different angle, right? On these various, like these different wallets and exchanges and whatever. And not all of them are going to perfectly agree on should I default withdrawals to Arbitrum or default withdrawals to Optimism or default withdrawals to Starknet or whatever. Like it creates a lot of social complexity. You also create non-fungible versions of different assets, right? So you have Arbitrum ETH, you have Starknet ETH, you have Optimism ETH, you have whatever. And those are not fungible with each other. And so now you're creating, some liquidity cost of moving between these things. And I just look at the total system complexity, not only technically, but also socially, is really increasing exponentially, because it's not that you have to get 2 or 3 parties to coordinate on all these decisions. You have to get thousands of parties who are all over the world, who are in different time zones, who speak different languages, who have come from different cultures, and you need to get all of them to agree on how to collectively interact with the system from all these different angles. And I find that you look at layer 2s and you look at bridges today, and it's a fucking mess. It's not to say that the problems are strictly intractable. They are theoretically tractable problems, technically, but there's really no obvious path socially of how you get everyone to agree and coordinate. And so, when we think of as coming back to my original rant on pick a variable to optimize for, the variable we've chosen to optimize for is minimize total social coordination required to make the system work. And I actually think that's the most important one, because these systems are permissionless. You can't force everyone to use some single structured API and it's global, because people are coming at it from different angles. You need to minimize the total surface area of social complexity. And the blog post I wrote in May of last year is really about that. I believe the blog post is titled "Technical Scalability Creates Social Scalability." And that's really the theory, is abstract all the complexity into the layer 1 so that what is exposed is as simple as possible for as broad an array of audiences and stakeholders as possible.
Yeah, so one of the rebuttals you get is around security, which your view is in the short run that could be an issue, that you have bugs. And I got Emin on the podcast, and he felt like, to him, the fees market was something that could have been optimized better. So do you think that could be an interesting optionality going forward? We'll have that sorted out, and we won't have these spam attacks on the network, and because of that, things will be better, or could be priced higher because of that.
Yeah. So again, one of the other things that I find is a very weird worldview espoused by a lot of crypto people is you have to ship 1.0, and then 1.0 should be able to theoretically stand on its own forever. And I find that framing to this violates the entire set of norms around software development that have been developed over the last 30 or 40 years. One thing I've come to very much appreciate about the Solana team is their ruthless focus on prioritization. What they shipped in March of 2020 barely worked, but it kind of sort of worked. And it took them 6 months to even get the thing to kind of sort of be stable. And since then, they've been focusing, that they understood the basic architecture was in place, the networking protocol, the virtual machine and execution layer, consensus, those things were all working. They suspected there was a lot of bugs to be had all around, and basically dealt with those bugs as they were brought to their attention. But instead of spending their time then on things like fee markets, which weren't relevant because there wasn't enough demand on the system, they instead focused on growing the total functionality of the system. And so the Solana team spent a lot of time building out Metaplex. They spent a lot of time working with the Serum team. They spent a lot of time on work building out key management functions with partners like Phantom and the Auth Network and others. They spent time on Solana Pay. They spent time on a lot of kind of hand-holding larger customers through integration, so that people like Render and Brave, which were announced at Breakpoint in November, they spent their time and energy on those kinds of activities because they believed those activities would grow the overall value of the Solana ecosystem. And they said, look, fee markets obviously must exist, but they don't need to exist at the current moment. And so they just didn't bother to optimize. Just why? Who cares? Wait till it becomes a problem before you deal with the problem. Inevitably, it does create some bad press whenever things go wrong and the fee markets aren't there. So you get a little bit of an egg on your face. But prioritization of engineering resources is by far the most important thing. And I think they've done by far the best job in thinking about that and being very ruthless about where they spend their energy and their time. And I believe in the long run, that is the right way to think about the system. Inevitably, they'll add other things that I'm sure are missing. But like for example, there's no slashing right now on the network in the consensus system. But they'll add it eventually. They're not opposed to it. It's very clear how it would work. They just haven't bothered. And so again, just wait till it becomes a problem before you need to deal with it. So I very much appreciate that very pragmatic focus.
So Kyle, I recently saw Multicoin made an investment in Aptos, which is another layer one, kind of similar thesis of composability, and also layer zero. So I'll take a twist on this question, right? So firstly, tell our audience a little bit about these protocols. And do you think investment in these two protocol is kind of setting a premise for Multicoin that you kind of are kind of seeing a multi-chain future, or is that something I'm missing?
In a theoretical world, I am a one-chain maximalist for asset ledgers, meaning things like Ethereum, Solana, Aptos. However, my theoretical worldview is not the actual world that exists. My theoretical worldview is all of finance happens on a single global ledger. Obviously, there's a fair number of technical problems between here and there, but actually, that's actually not the real problem. The real problem is history is path dependent, and getting everyone in the world to agree on a single execution engine or single asset ledger is actually just impossible for social reasons and political reasons. And so the world, I think, must be multi-chain because of social and political reasons. We've been fairly thoughtful about which of those we bet on. Our two largest bets are Solana and Aptos. They're really our only two meaningful bets in that space. And the reason that we like Aptos so much is two main reasons. One, they architecturally believe the same thing that Solana does, which is that you want to focus on single shard scaling because you minimize the total surface area of social coordination, as I just kind of went on a rant about a few minutes ago. And then the second is that they're leveraging the Move language. I think that generally speaking, most of the people in the crypto space undervalue the importance of programming models and programming languages in these systems. And given the fact that the basic point of all of these systems is get everyone in the world to use the same computer to execute some code that everyone agrees on is being executed. And given that you're kind of sort of trying to get 7 billion people to use the same computer is basically what you're trying to get people to do, it turns out the nuances of programming models really matter because they basically have a fixed amount of resources for a theoretically infinite number of users. And so I look at Solidity and the EVM, and I'm just like, this is amateur hour, and this is not going to support the kinds of scale of usage that it needs to. So I've always thought it was important to really think about programming languages and programming models from first principles. I certainly see that in Solana. I certainly see that in the Move language. And so we backed Aptos because of that focus.
So Kyle, on that note, at the moment, when you speak with developers and auditors, they know Solidity, they're comfortable with EVM, and now they're learning Rust, for example. So with another programming language Move, do you think one rebuttal could be that it could be issues for developers to kind of learn this language and auditors to kind of know how to audit smart contract based on that language? Do you think that could be an issue?
It is a problem. It's not that the problem doesn't exist, but it's a question of picking the right variables to optimize for. Optimizing for backwards compatibility with the entire existing EVM ecosystem is absolutely nonsensical because the entire EVM ecosystem rounds to zero. The number of smart contracts that exist on any EVM-based chain that matter is measured in 20, maybe 50 if you're being generous. Just the sheer amount of absolute code that has been written that matters is just extraordinarily small. It doesn't mean there can't be a lot of dollars in those contracts, but just the sheer quantum of code written is extraordinarily small. So I have a saying I use with our team frequently, which is look forwards, not backwards. There is a point in time in which you need to prioritize backwards compatibility. So that Microsoft is kind of the best case study of that in the history of software. But the scale of the EVM in terms of just like quantum of code written is like today a fraction of like what the Win32 API was in 1994. And so I just don't understand the need to do so.
So, Kyle, can you also tell us a little bit about Layer Zero? Because if you now see uh, a multi-chain world, how that protocol can enable multi-chain communication between different protocols, different systems, and different layer ones.
Yeah. So because of path dependency in these systems, in politics and egos and such, there will be multiple chains that will have lots of stuff happening on them. Because those chains will exist and they will not be the same chain, there will be some need for those chains to talk to each other. And like Layer Zero is kind of our favorite technical approach in architecture to solving that problem. Really what drew us to the Layer Zero protocol is just its simplicity. It's just extremely lightweight. It's very easy to understand, and it supports any message passing you want. So we've been very excited about them. We invested in them back in August or September of last year, I believe, and I added more recently. And so we just love the simplicity of their approach. In a lot of ways, they're basically just making what were previously atomic transactions within a single asset ledger. They're enabling you to break up those functions across multiple asset ledgers. Obviously, you lose atomicity when you do that, given different consensus systems. But like, you basically just allow you to take the functions of various contracts and just put them in different places. And Layer Zero is the glue that does that. We found the system to be very elegant and kind of a necessary thing that must exist given the reality of the world we live in.
Thank you, Kyle. So just moving on and just touching upon the composability, which we touched on earlier. So I looked at your multi-coin summit. You were all about composability. Your bet on Solana is also about composability. But I've seen recent investment of multi-coin, which is focusing on Web3 composability. So investment like Fluence and Ceramic. Uh, can you tell us how those investment capture the thing, and also kind of tell our audience a little bit over those projects in an easy to understand manner, because I believe they're bit technical projects as well.
Sure. So we generally believe pretty strongly in kind of the Web3 future thing. There's going to be a lot of, especially consumer apps that will want to leverage credibly neutral backends for various functions. We've been investing in credibly neutral backends since early 2018. Our first of which was LivePeer, our second of which was Graph, third of which was probably Arweave, more recently then Ceramic and Fluence. And I may be missing one or two that I can't recall off the top of my head. And these things perform different functions for different types of use cases. Ceramic specifically is a database that allows users to basically own their own data. So think like a D-Twitter or D-Reddit or D-Discord kind of a thing. But then you still retain basically the kind of the blockchain-like properties in which there's basically a Merkle root-like structure that ties all of the users' accounts together across millions of users. So users, although users are not physically hosting their own data on their own computer, they can verify quickly by looking at through Merkle root or whatever the data being presented to them by a third-party node is in fact up to date and valid. Where Ceramic differs from a blockchain, or I should say an asset ledger like Ethereum or Solana, is that it does not support general purpose smart contracts. It does not support notions of shared state. Every piece of data in Ceramic must be owned by one user. And so this works well for like I'm writing tweets. It works well for what is my total number of tweets I've written, which obviously every time you write a tweet increments by one. But it doesn't deal with scarcity. So the classic definition of scarcity is a token. There's only 100 tokens, right? Like there's a fixed number of tokens that can be had and shared between X number of people. Ceramic does not support that function at all. And because it does that, it enables the system to scale horizontally kind of very nicely across thousands or millions of nodes. So we invested in Ceramic for that reason. I think today there's like something like between 500 and 1,000 developers building on top of Ceramic. I think it's kind of thus far really the only thing of its own class or category, and is being built on by a lot of folks. So that's very exciting. We led a round that we announced a few weeks ago in Ceramic. Other one we kind of announced recently is called Fluence. Fluence is basically the simplest mental model is permissionless, decentralized Lambda. So if you're not familiar with AWS Lambda, it was announced in 2014 or thereabouts, maybe 15, but sometime around then. And it enables developers to write a function call, and then any piece of data that goes in or out, and it actually bills developers per function call. There's all kinds of limitations in Lambda in terms of how much total amount of computation and some other things, whatever. But basically, Fluence is that, but it's enabled to run on a permissionless network of where the physical nodes are all over the world. And our view here is that this is a very important primitive. As you have more data going into systems like Ceramic and Arweave, then you're going to want to do more and more computations over those pieces of data, and those computations will be way too expensive to perform on chain, or even in some sort of zero knowledge proof thing. And so you're going to need a general purpose environment for being able to write computations that enable hundreds or thousands of users to interact with each other. I very much see a world in which metaverses that need to do shared computation between lots of users are leveraging something like Fluence. Any MMORPG type games, things like Star Atlas and others, I think will leverage Fluence in time. Even simple things like aggregating a lot of snapshot votes for governance proposals can leverage Fluence. So there's all kinds of other kind of cool things you can do with it. But we think it's a really important primitive. It's admittedly a little bit further down the risk curve, and just its uses are not still totally clear. But fundamentally, if you have all this data in these systems, you're going to want to be able to compute over them in some sort of open permissions Lambda-like thing. And we think Fluence will probably be that.
So Kyle, talking about computation, one of the bets Multicoin has made is render, which is kind of similar but different. And I believe render and Arwave are like an index level exposure at the moment for you guys for uh, NFTs, gaming, and metaverse. So let's say if somebody wants to obtain exposure to these sectors apart from these infrastructure, in terms of asset selection, do you also see other ways of perhaps playing this theme? And also, let's say we are sitting in 2025, do you envision Multicoin taking concentrated bets on crypto crypto native NFTs or crypto gamings that are very crypto native?
So on like the first question, yeah, there's a lot of ways to play kind of Web3 themes broadly. Render, Ceramic, Arweave, Graph being some examples, obviously, I just highlighted. There will be more. We're not done with Web3 primitives. Not everything that needs to exist exists. So you're definitely excited about that space, and there's a lot of opportunities. In terms of buying NFTs, I mean, we can buy NFTs today, and we have. We bought some loot, for example, back in, I don't know, August or September or whatever. The bigger problem is just a function of size for us. We just, our funds are large enough that like putting $100,000 or even $1 million into an NFT just doesn't move the needle. I have no interest in managing a collection of 500 NFTs. So it's just a function of size, really. Not to say we won't buy a $30 million NFT one day. It may be possible. I don't know. I'm not going to say it's likely, but who knows?
What about gaming projects, metaverse projects? Uh, can you guys imagine yourself taking a bet on individual game, let's say by 2025, or do you think there's just too much excitement over it at the moment?
Yeah, we've already invested in at least one metaverse game thing. It's Portables, which was announced some time ago. It's a Solana-based kind of 3D virtual environment UGC thing. We love the team, and they have good kind of early traction. We're generally interested in metaverses. I will admit it's a sector that has a very poor signal to noise ratio. We definitely will invest in more, but like very selectively. What we're not going to do is turn into a gaming fund. But we are definitely continuing to look at games. But we're only looking at ones we think are really differentiated in what they're doing. I'm not going to invest in 20 3D virtual environment UGC things. Like it's just, there are 500 of them, but like we just don't care. We'll be very selective with what we do.
So, Kyle, what will make a metaverse or a gaming project differentiated to get you excited?
I mean, I wish I knew the answer to that question. I don't really know the answer to that question, other than like the founders have clearly demonstrated deep thought about what they're doing and why they're doing it, and they have some unique view on what people are going to do in that environment. The biggest problem with all of these UGC metaverse things is they're like, "Yay, come build some stuff," but then there's like, "What do you do?" And what do you do is actually the hardest question to answer. Most people have not given that enough thought. Whenever we see compelling answers to that question, we get more excited.
So I've seen play to earn kind of being mimicked in different areas now. One of the projects I recently looked into, Step In, like it's basically you move and you earn. Do you kind of see this primitive of play to earn kind of infiltrating sustainably in different walks of life? to kind of incentivize certain coordination and behavior, uh, and cool things will happen because of that.
Yeah. Paying people to do things that they already do for free is almost certainly a bad idea, because we already know that the consumer behavior, people will do it for free. So paying them to do it is rather strange. That's comment A. Comment B, there seems to be the class of X to earn type of things tend to be things that I would generally call pro-social, self-improvement, productive behaviors. And so, for example, the ones you see are walk to earn, or does it call it some physical exercise to earn? I've seen, I kid you not, sleep to earn. I've seen learn to earn. These are all generally things that are like supposed to be productive for you, right? It's like some investment in yourself. I am extremely skeptical that that class of to earn makes any sense. Not to say it's impossible, but I'll say I'm skeptical. If people learn things because they're forced to or because they're interested, paying people to learn things, I'm quite skeptical their retention will be above zero. Telling people to take care of themselves with physical health, with diet, with sleep, again, I'm very skeptical of. There's already a lot of variations of this with employer health programs and like reduce your health insurance premiums with 10,000 steps per day and whatever. Efficacy rates for these things are like garbage. Like they're just like, they like don't work. At least not in the United States. I really can't speak for elsewhere, but they just don't work. So I'm quite skeptical that the putting money in these things unlocks the behaviors. What's probably more effective is like shame. Like shame to earn is actually like a very interesting concept. Like, hey, I set this goal to lose 10 pounds in a month, whatever. If I eat this bad food, you can publicly shame me. And when you shame me, you get paid. Like that is like, I think more interesting. But like people feel bad shaming their friends. So like, it's like, and it gets a little perverse and a little weird, but like, that to me is kind of more interesting than just like, oh, look, you like walk 10,000 steps, here's $2. I don't really buy it. There's a lot of interesting experiments people are running. Most of the experiments being run have already been run in a pre-crypto way. They may not have had the word token in them. They may not have quite had the speculative elements that crypto has. But that doesn't mean the experiments haven't been run. I think most of the founders in these sectors are fairly ignorant of the experiments that have been tried.
Just as a counter argument, so let's say when you're running these experiments, even though they might not be fruitful, but somehow you gamify them, then do you think you can still have a fruitful outcome because you have gamified it, and certain thing you're trying to promote becomes a habit, and because of that, these primitives could become powerful. So let's say with move to earn, like for me, like it has become a habit now because of the gamification element. Okay, I'm walking 10 minutes and I'll earn certain tokens, and I'm using those tokens to upgrade my shoes, for example. And I have to keep doing it. And I kind of feel like it becomes a habit. So do you feel the gamification element, the joy element could be interesting element to kind of solidify this behavior, or still skeptical?
I mean, look, with health and fitness specifically, once the Apple Watch launched, and even also with the iPhone, I believe they introduced the motion chip in the iPhone, and I think it was 2013 or 2014. And then the Apple Watch, I believe, launched in 2015. There were an absolute ton of apps that did every conceivable permutation of gamification for encouraging behaviors. Very few of them are relevant today. Probably the one that I think is most successful is Strava, if I were to guess. I don't know if that's true, but based on my anecdotal data, that is. And what Strava did was actually not focus on normal people, but focus on athletes and people who are competitive. And it's not lose 10 pounds. It's, hey, you're getting ready for a marathon, like you and your buddies are training together, which is obviously a very completely different person and a completely different psychological mindset than lose 5 or 10 pounds. So that seems to have worked rather well for a very different psychological frame. The more mass market you go, it seems like the more intractable the problem is. Yeah, I don't know. Look, I'm not saying step in won't work, to be clear, but I'm very skeptical that the retention and caring is there.
Right. So just talking about gamification, I've seen gamification with financial application as well. Let's say Robinhood, and I think there is one application that you guys have also backed, I believe, called Enzo Finance. So do you feel the gamification of finance could be something which is which is interesting and could lead to strong network effects.
I mean, crypto is the gamification of finance. Like, that's what crypto Twitter is. That's what Discord is. Like, absolutely.
All right. So just moving forward, I read your blog post about disruption of music and traditional music value chain. So could you also walk us audience through that thesis? And apart from audience, what asset selection for this thesis could work out?
Yeah. Sort of blog post a couple weeks ago. I think it's called Rebundling the Audio Value Chain or something like that. The thesis is basically that if you're going to introduce new monetization vectors into music and creative control things, whatever, then the right way to do it is to rebundle the entire stack. There's really three parts of the stack. There's risk sharing, because most musicians don't make money. There's marketing and fan engagement, and then there's the distribution, like the buttons on the screen and hit the play button kind of a thing. Traditionally, if you go back 30, 40 years, all three of those were bundled together, meaning you engage the record label more or less. The internet really screwed that up. And the record label had like distribution with Virgin Records and Walmart and Best Buy and whatever. But it was like a very centrally controlled and managed. Since the internet came along, it really disrupted part three, which is distribution, obviously Napster and then iTunes and now Spotify and such. My theory is if you're going to introduce a new way to make money for musicians, like call it NFTs or patronage or social tokens or whatever, that you need to bundle those things into the front end, into the thing with the play button on it. And if you do, I think you can kind of build a next generation music label, record label thing. I'm using these terms somewhat loosely. I feel pretty confident that's probably the right way to think about it. The question is like, what do you invest in to invest in that theory? You can see in each of those three categories, risk sharing, marketing, and distribution, there's crypto native companies focusing on all three. Really the first of those to exist at all was Audius, and we are investors in Audius as of 2 years ago. We haven't sold a single audio token. We continue to be very long. So obviously the question for the Audius team is, will they enable monetization for creators and obviously build that into the UI and such? Answer is maybe. I don't know. Hopefully they'll figure it out. Certainly they haven't done so yet, although I'd say we're optimistic that they will. The team is great. Meanwhile, on the other end, you've got people like Royal and Sound and Catalog kind of focusing on monetization, but they have no notion of distribution built in at all. Some of them are trying to interface to your Spotify accounts or your account with Universal or whatever. Some of them aren't. And so there's different mechanical ways to go about that. Very unclear what the right approach is. Our general thing we want to optimize for is passing the toothbrush test. The toothbrush test is kind of a famous Larry Page quote from 10 years ago or something. And Larry Page said he only wants Google to build products that pass the toothbrush test, which means it has to be a product that you use at least twice a day. And that's kind of my general sense for NFT music things as well, is that the platform that wins will be the one that passes the toothbrush test. My biggest concern with Royal and Sound and Catalog is they definitively fail the toothbrush test, which is like, maybe you go there once a week, but like you're not going there 6 times a day because like there's no reason to go there 6 times a day. On Audius, right, like a lot of people listen to Spotify for hours per day. A lot of people listen to Audius for hours per day. Obviously, you're opening the app fairly frequently. So my general goal is the thing I'm looking for is merging the monetization with the distribution. And hopefully Audius will figure it out.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Kyle, I'm cognizant of your time. So we have the last segment before we conclude the podcast. It will be like a rapid fire round. And this will be for all those people who want to become better investors. So I'm going to ask you some questions that will help me as well as some of the other people out there to just become better investors. So first question. So commonalities in variables and founder traits with some of your successful bets like Helium, Solana, Graph, Arweave.
I generally don't love to generalize across different classes of investment. I find that is probably a bad thing to do. To the extent you can generalize with founders, founder market fit, I think, is quite important. Understanding how and why the guy or the gal ended up doing what they're doing is pretty important. It's extremely rare that like someone builds something of substance and the founder market fit story is not good. So that's number one. And then number two, I would say, is just like passion about talking about the problem that they're solving. There's a lot of people who are excited about the market. They're not excited about the problem. So like NFTs and metaverses are a very good example of this. Most of the NFT pitch decks are like, "Oh my god, NFTs are hard to use," and like, it's like, yeah, I don't believe you're articulating a problem well and understand that and are talking about it with a passion. With metaverse is even more of a problem because it's like, what do you do in the metaverse? And it's like, well, it's a metaverse, and I'm like, well, you need to answer the question, what do you do in the metaverse? So hearing people talk about, they have a vision for what people are going to do in the metaverse, and that they have a passion about it is pretty important. Beyond those two things, I think it's pretty hard to generalize across founders, given just the diversity of things we look at.
So Kyle, second question is around your blogs. So in 2017, like before you stopped posting your personal blogs and started Multicoin, you had a blog about Tesla, which that forecast became true 3 years ago, like 1 year ago, where Tesla became more than a car company. And there was also a blog post in 2017 on token velocity and token value accrual. So you have been prescient with some of your forecasts. So how can investors actually become better forecasters? Like, do you have any tips?
I don't know how to offer that advice. I can tell you, I read a lot. I like talking to smart people. And I think that's really all I can tell you.
So
That's
on
my secret
average,
sauce.
yeah. So on average, how would you say somebody who's like mid 20s, how much should they read? Like, should they read till their head hurts and push harder and improve their frontal lobe muscles?
Uh, I can't make any prescriptive statements. I can tell you my reading diet is 3 to 4 hours per day, and I can tell you it has been for 15 years. Obviously, because of that, I have a lot of accumulated knowledge across a lot of sectors. My method of information accrual is extremely inefficient because it takes 3 to 4 hours per day. However, it seems to be extremely effective. It is quite rare you have things in life that are both extremely inefficient and extremely effective. Those two things usually do not go hand in hand. I do not know how to replicate that or make it more efficient. I wish I did. But unfortunately, you never know when you're going to look at a new investment and being able to connect that to the dots of stuff you've read in the past. So I don't really have any good generalizations for what you should or shouldn't do. The one comment I would make is write more. Reading is good, but actually writing is more important. Being able to clearly articulate theses is extremely important and generally a skill that not enough people have.
Yeah, I agree with that. So final question before we conclude the podcast, Kyle. So I just want to make a day-to-day comparison of what your day-to-day looked like in 2017, between 2019-20 when you made a lot of successful bets, and right now. Like, how has that changed, and what is your routine like?
Our team has not changed a whole lot.
Sorry, not your team, your routine. Yeah.
Oh, my routine also hasn't really changed. Biggest thing that changed in the last 2 years is I travel way less. That's primarily a function of COVID. And I'm very thankful for that. I don't like traveling for work. My travel is down probably 80%, maybe 90%, which is great. My routine is pretty straightforward. I wake up, and I do not have an alarm. I wake up whenever my body gets up, which is usually between 6 and 7. Brush my teeth. So obviously just kind of get ready for the day. I'll take a shower, and then start working. I'll work until 4 or so, somewhere between 4 and 6, and then work out around that time, and then work until I go to bed. Eat dinner along the way. Pretty boring routine. I do not eat breakfast. I eat lunch usually between 12 and 2, and usually eat dinner between 7 and 8. Pretty boring routine.
Does that also spill over in the weekends?
Weekends, I try and see my friends more and do socially things. Obviously, some travel on the weekends with my personal travel. But during the week, my routine is pretty straightforward. I work from home. I love working from home because I have no travel time. And it turns out 10 minutes of travel 2 times a day is 20 minutes a day. And I like getting those minutes back.
Thank you, Kyle. It has been a fun podcast. So if any of the builders and investors want to reach out, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, just email me, kyle@multicoin.capital, or my Twitter DMs are open. Just go to my Twitter and you can DM me.
Right. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you for coming to the 100X show.
Hey, Mehdi, pleasure to be on. Thanks so much.